The authorities arrived quickly and secured the scene. I was happy to meet with my old friend from the academy, and we took a moment to catch up on things. He said that the investigation into the fire that had destroyed my house had yielded the same evidence as the explosion on the bluffs of Windenburg. The same accelerant was used in each. They were currently attempting to discover where it was obtained, and who might have used it. I was grateful that they had been so diligent in their investigation. He also said that there had been an analysis of the paint smears found at the scene of Eliza's accident. It was a custom paint, used in custom painting of vehicles. It too was being looked into. I wished him well in his work, and thanked him. He held out his doubts that these occurrences may be related. It might just be a strange coincidence of facts. Could I be making a mountain from a molehill? He bade me to consider the alternatives. I thanked him for his rationalization. I returned home to relax a bit. I went to the icebox and retrieved a beer. A domestic brand I had grown fond of. I was startled to see a young lady enter from the pool area. She introduced herself. Her name was Shannon, and she was on holiday before she was to enter university later this year. She smiled and explained that my maid was her great-aunt. The maid arrived and with a sheepish smile asked if I wouldn't mind the visit by her niece. It had been quite unexpected by her. I reassured her that no, I wouldn't object at all. She thanked me and promised a delicious supper for us as a reward for my kindness, and after again showering me with apologies, she said that her niece would assume some of the daily chores around the household. I left to take a nice bath. It was good to simply sit in the hot tub and think about the events of the day. What to do? I had contacted the owner of the second box and he had agreed on a teleconference with me. I went to the computer to check on my social mailings. I had sent a copy of the sheet music as well as an ep3 of Mrs. Landgrab's music box melody to him. Shannon arrived and watched as I conversed. He replied. He had listened to the tape, and had looked carefully at the music sheet. They did have slight discrepancies in the notes. Small, and only a couple per offering. He also noticed that his own box had a slightly different rendition of the theme. He recalled it well, and sent me a copy of his own playing of it on his laptop. Interesting, they were all different in a subtle way. A slight accident by an apprentice builder. He would not venture to say, but he did express a bit of buyer's remorse over the agreed-on price he had paid for the trinket. I told him I did understand, having been married myself. He asked for my forgiveness now, as he was late for a date with a client of his. A Mrs. Landgrab. Did I know her? I bid him goodbye without an answer. I wanted to just check on who had made the boxes. Seemed like this would quickly dispel any silly thoughts I had on these seemingly connected dots. There was reason to suspect that I had once again assumed too much. A complete waste of my time, and I had overthought all of this. I went to the penitentiary. The head of physiatry met me and explained my quest. He was a bit reluctant at first, dealing with his type of patients, but eventually I persuaded him with the notion that this would put to rest my own reservations in the case. He laughed. What could I possibly find from meeting the builder of the toy boats? But he sent me to the workroom across the prison yard. I entered. To my complete surprise, I met the builder. It was Mortimer Goth himself. He was currently working on another boat. I exchanged small talk with him. How was he holding up in prison? Was he sorry for his monstrous acts against the Sims? He denied anything, and claimed he was under a mental breakdown at the time. His lawyers would soon secure his release, and then he would bring legal action against all who had wronged him. He had no idea what I was asking about. His craftsmanship was superb. I must be mistaken, or possibly ill myself, to waste his and my time on such a trivial matter. I left him and walked across the yard. I did not believe him. I returned home to the piano once more. Shannon joined me on the veranda and I played the melody in full from the sheets. It was a wonderful song with childlike tones. Shannon commented on my prowess with the keyboards. She had taken lessons, and her teacher had used a number the keyboard technique. I remembered the young man at the store. He had used the same teaching aid. I numbered the keys in my head starting with the note in middle position. I played the original melody's first few notes, then I rendered the notes from Mrs. Landgrab's version to the keys. Odd. Then I played the offering learned from the second owner. It gave me 3 sets of numbers: 42, 63, and 48. These were the numbers of the slight variations as marked on the keys. It meant nothing to me. As I played with the keys, Shannon talked of her upcoming semester at university. She would have a slight problem with geography. It seems all that attention to longitude and latitude had not been a forte of hers. She asked if I was familiar with the topic and could I assist her. I was about to reply when it suddenly took hold of me. If I put the numbers into succession, it developed into, possibly, the location that would be on a map. Only I had no idea what order to use. Or even if the original was to be involved in the equations. Food for thought. But I was willing to bet that Mortimer knew the sequence. I returned to the prison. I wanted to further talk to Mortimer Goth about what I suspected was a form of his trying to give directions to someone. He had brilliantly used his activities there to make little toy boat music boxes that, with a slight alteration to the tune, gave directions to something. What, I had no idea. And as for why, I was still at a loss. I approached the doctor and requested an audience with Mortimer. He was hesitant, as I had just been in contact with him. He had become very agitated after I had left, and he went to his cell without attending the evening meal. His actions, while not unusual for a psychiatric patient in custody, had been strange even for him. He muttered something to himself. He felt as if a possible sword of Damocles was leveled over his head. With a look of desperation, he had returned directly from the workshop. He checked his current location, and sent me to his area of the prison. We went down the corridor to his cell. The corridor had a couple of prisoners and they chuckled as I approached his cell. Mortimer had committed suicide. He lay dead on the floor of his cell. The doctor was flabbergasted by the sight. How could this happen so quickly? I knew the reason. He was very well to be afraid I was on the trail of his plot. There would be no revelation as to his plan. I would now have to second-guess what his intentions were, and who was the intended recipient of his message. I recalled the bidder that had left the auction house abruptly without the boats. It seemed logical that they had committed the burglaries, and had killed Mrs. Landgrab. I began to formulate my suspicions. I would pay Mrs. Bella Goth a visit.